stand by, your conference is about to begin. Welcome to the Toronto University webinar. Please note that lines will remain in listen-only mode for the duration of the call. And I would like to turn the meeting over to Jaime Sanchez.
Hello, good morning and afternoon, everyone. Welcome again to our First Nations Carbon webinar. This is a third in a six-part series. I work with the Carrier-Secani Tribal Council, and today's topic of discussions are going to be around emissions trading policies and legislations in Canada. The First Nations Carbon Collaborative has been a collaborative project between the International Institute for Sustainable Development, the Center for Indigenous Environmental Resources, both based out of Winnipeg, and several First Nations, including the Carrier-Secani Tribal Council, located in north central BC, Poplar River First Nation within Manitoba, and the Clecho government, Northwest Territories. So the purpose of these webinar series is about learning and sharing information regarding carbon and emissions trading and how it impacts Aboriginal communities. Some of the documents that we've produced through our First Nations Carbon Collaborative project are now available online, available at the Carrier-Secani, IISD, and SEER websites. You'll have to forgive us that at the CSTC we were undergoing a transition on our website, so there's still some things being fixed, but the webinar presentations are now online. So some of the documents we produced this year include a Voices from the Field report, looked at case studies from different First Nations around the world, including Canada, the U.S., Mexico, New Zealand, and Australia. There was also a annotated bibliography produced for this project that both documents are available online now. We'd like to thank our many projects and supporters and funders, including Indian and Northern Affairs Canada through the BC Capacity Initiative Program, the New Relationship Trust Fund, BC First Nations Energy Mining Council, and the University of Toronto Centre for Environment, who's assisted us with some of the organization as well as the technology for this webinar. So today's webinar, the agenda is available on the website at carriersecani.ca. Sorry, there's an error here. The topic of today's discussion is around First Nations policy, carbon policy and legislation in Canada. And today's speakers, we have Rob Miller from Titerle and Stuart Wuttke from the Assembly of First Nations. Today, Stuart will open up the talk, and Stuart Wuttke is a member of the Garden Hill First Nation. He's a member of the Law Society of Upper Canada and Manitoba. He has provided advice to First Nation organizations at the local and regional and national level. He has served as a lead education negotiator in Manitoba self-government negotiations under the Framework Agreement Initiative. In 2004, Stuart joined the Assembly of First Nations, and over the last 5 years, he's been the director of the AFN's Environmental Stewardship Unit, and he is presently now General Counsel for the Assembly of First Nations. So I'll be passing the presentation over to Stuart.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully everyone can hear me. I'd like to thank the sponsors of this program for allowing me to do a presentation to you regarding carbon finance and potential implications it could have for First Nation communities. On behalf of the Assembly of First Nations, I'd like to thank the Carrier-Secani Tribal Council for inviting us, and we look forward to ongoing collaboration with the Carrier-Secani Tribal Council. My presentation itself will be brief today, and just provide some basic oversight on some of the programs that are out there. As many of you may know, the Assembly of First Nations really does provide a supporting role to many First Nation communities. I would look at communicating First Nation policy perspectives to both federal government, provincial governments, and supporting First Nation communities. As far as Canadian society in general, we like to promote greater awareness and respect of First Nation rights and interests. Really facilitate the relationship between the Crown and First Nation communities. With the election of National Chief at Leo, the Assembly of First Nations has undergone 5 strategic direction and priority areas, which we basically refer to as pillars. First one, supporting First Nations and families, exercising, implementing First Nation rights, supporting First Nation governance and nation building, advocating economic environmental interests, and advocating for changes within communities and organizations. With respect to carbon finance and climate change, that would fall under the 4th pillar there, economic environmental interests. As you may know, a lot of the carbon finance and schemes that have been developed were a result of climate change discussions at the international level, where there is a global effort to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. With respect to carbon and forests, of course, carbon finance relates to many areas, not only the forests, but the large majority of First Nation communities are located in the boreal forest or other forest areas. And at this point, many people see the forest as one of the cheapest ways to store carbon, and there's been a lot of interest in the boreal forest over the last little while. But with regards to the forest, many First Nations, of course, have resided in the boreal regions of Canada for forever. And really the use of the forest, the resources, the biodiversity of the forest really play an important role in First Nation communities, even till today. In many areas in the north, there's still a lot of sustenance hunting and that's going out. A lot of medicines are being collected in the forests. So forests do continue to play an important role with the First Nation communities. And there's also a number of economic development aspects with respect to the forest. A number of First Nations have been getting involved into forestry, forest products, that type of thing. So it does hold a lot of potential. But really, at the core relationship between the First Nation communities and the forest really is about respecting the environment and protecting it. As you know, carbon itself is a gas, but First Nations have rightfully been asserting that they do own all the trees, all the carbon in the carbon sinks with respect to the forests and the wetlands and other areas across Canada. And that's a position that the Assembly of First Nation does support. Clearly, when the treaties were signed and the negotiations that are going on right now, the First Nations themselves have never given up their right to the resources, to the trees, to the forests, to the animals, and even the land that some of the traditional territories. With respect to greenhouse gas reductions and the commitments and the whole carbon finance area, really in Canada, it's well to the international negotiations at the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and the Assembly of First Nations has been involved in those discussions for a number of years now. But Canada has made a number of commitments internationally and even signed on to the Kyoto Protocol, the first Kyoto Protocol, where they undertaken to reduce their emissions of greenhouse gases. Since the Conservative government came in under the Harper regime, they sort of backed away from the Kyoto Protocol commitments. But the Harper government has committed to reducing Canada's total greenhouse gases by 17% from 2000 levels by 2020. So there is a commitment there. And as a result of that, Canada for a while was looking at carbon finance, a cap and trade system to assist the federal government in reducing Canada's emissions. As you know, many of the emissions that are being output by Canada is not necessarily from the government, but of course from industry, household consumers, so pretty much everyone in Canada